welcome everyone. Welcome to the second installment of the third season of our VOILA seminars, Visions of Intelligence Artificielle, that combines the French and the English best, in French speaking and English speaking best of talks on AI on a series of topics that hopefully appeal to an interdisciplinary community of computer scientists, social scientists, humanities, and so on and so forth. The idea of AI, of VOILA, is to indeed to have the most inclusive, open approach to artificial intelligence and to nurture the ideas of how AI is evolving and in the direction, which are the actors and so on and so forth, but also many other topics for the researchers of the University of Côte d'Azur and beyond, because we are opening the seminars internationally, worldwide. So as I said before, the recording was interrupted. My name is Simone Vannuccini. I'm one of the organizers of the seminar series, together with Lucille Sassatelli, who is the other co-organizer and professor of computer science at the University of Côte d'Azur. And you're going to hear from her later in French, for a brief introduction in French. And I am a junior professor in the economics of AI and innovation at the University of Côte d'Azur. So today we are very happy to have with us Jack Stilgoe, that he's a professor of science and technology policy, and Jack, correct me in case, but at University College London. So we have a direct connection with London today to discuss a topic that usually we give some broad titles to our voilas. So sometimes it was AI and labor, AI environmental impact. Then, of course, the speakers, they have their own title for the precise talk that they do. Today, we called it AI and non-existential risk, because we wanted to stress how much of the discourse and the debate that revolves around the, let's say, existential risk, security issues around AI are not really debates worth believing so much, so we need to approach them critically, and that's some of the direction that Jack will explore. Jack has been working on many topics related to technology, science, and technology policy, but recently has been published a series of very interesting pieces in Science, correct me if I'm wrong, and you can then check this out, because they are very insightful. So before giving the floor to Jack, couple of rules of the game. So we have now the lecture for around 40 minutes, and then we have a bit of questions from the audience. Then we have a small panel of discussants. In this case will be Lucille and myself, and then again a couple of slot for questions until 5:30, when our seminar will end. We are recording the seminar, which means that if you do not feel comfortable to be in the room when the seminar is recorded, you still have the exit option of leaving, but please do not leave and stay with us, and only the talk is going to be recorded, so the debate is not be then put on the FLA Côte d'Azur YouTube channel. So given that, I think I said it all. So we're very excited to have you here, Jack, and I just leave the floor to Lucille for a brief introduction to VOILA in French, if you like.
Oui, donc très rapidement, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Donc vous avez eu toute l'introduction, voilà, de Simone pour ce séminaire que nous avons cette semaine. Il y en a un autre la semaine prochaine, extrêmement enthousiasmant aussi, par quelqu'un qui est en neurosciences. On en parlera un petit peu après. Juste pour rappeler qu'en fonction de ce que vous préférez en termes de langue, vous pouvez avoir les captions, les sous-titres qui sont automatiquement transcrits pendant le talk, en appuyant sur le petit bouton CC que vous avez en bas du Zoom. Voilà. N'hésitez pas non plus à poser vos questions dans le chat pendant le talk. Okay, thank you very much. And Jack, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucille. Thank you, Simone. It's a real pleasure to join you all. Thank you for the invitation. So as Simone says, I'm going to be definitely speaking critically about the debate about AI risk. As a social scientist, I'm particularly interested in understanding how and why risks get framed in the way that they do. And that includes quite a lot of work. My work is with computer scientists and others in multidisciplinary teams. And just to give you, I mean, I won't talk about all the things that I do, but just the sort of umbrella project that I'm involved with is this program that's a big UK Research Council funded program called Responsible AI. Responsible AI funds research across disciplines, across universities, looking from basic research to innovation at, how we can make AI better in various ways. As a social scientist who has always been interested in questions of responsible innovation, this is particularly interesting for me. And I thought I would just frame today's talk in terms of irresponsibility, because I am increasingly concerned with the phrase responsible AI, as I will explain in a little bit. I'll give you a quick flavor for the sorts of things that I'm going to cover. Hopefully you can all see my slides changing. If anything doesn't work, please just do shout. So as Simone said, I'm a social scientist, but I'm a qualitative social scientist. I'm a sociologist of science and technology. So that means I'm really interested in how and why scientists do what they do and how we might govern science and technology better. My question for today basically is, why is responsible AI not working? And I'll explain what I mean by not working. My sort of answer to that is to point to the various ways, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of them today, in which irresponsibility is organized in and around artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about the constructions of risk and so-called AI safety. I'm going to be talking about the debate on purposes. If I forget to mention it later, I'm particularly interested in what Simone and colleagues have to say about questions of general purpose technologies, because I think that's a key sort of political point that governments have failed to grapple with so far. And I'm going to be ending with a bit of data from a survey that we've been running recently, my team and I, of AI researchers, to make the point that AI researchers suggest far more diversity of values and perspectives than the debate about AI, as it's sort of commonly heard, would suggest. Now, I'm conscious that I was originally due to give this talk back in November, and looking back on the sorts of stories that had been a concern back in November, I wanted to sort of capture what seemed to be some dispatches from the front line of a social experiment that had been taking place around artificial intelligence. We were in a situation where everybody, everywhere, all the time had opinions about artificial intelligence. And yet the technology was still largely to be defined. Questions of its risks and benefits were and remain hugely uncertain. I thought I would just point to a few stories that sort of grabbed my attention, not just because they suggested things to do with the opportunities and uncertainties of AI, but also because they sort of captured a sense of emerging ideas of responsibility that were swirling around this new technology. So we had a story, one of many stories, in which makers of large language models had been under fire from the holders of copyright. That's continued in the UK. Only this week we've had a campaign from the creative industries about the protection of their copyrighted content. We had stories about labor and the responsibilities that workers at tech companies felt that they had to get their companies to circumscribe particular activities. We had stories about the impacts of AI outputs on society and on government's responses to some of those. So this is an example of a headline about South Korea, right, where the concern about deepfake pornography managed to attract the attention of the highest levels of government. We had many stories of AI's mistakes, some of them funny, some of them hugely consequential, and society trying to make sense of what those things implied. We had stories of corporate governance, the sense that as the companies behind artificial intelligence become the largest companies in the world, or as the largest companies in the world acquire interests in artificial intelligence, corporate governance, in the absence of strong governmental regulation, becomes more than just an object of curiosity. And we have questions of expectations. So this was one story from before the new year about the valuation of NVIDIA, who I guess more than any company embody the sort of picks and shovels of the AI gold rush, right? They are the people selling the chips that, according to the large technology companies' claims, were necessary to train the largest models. And then, so this was, up until the end of last year, these were some of the stories that we started to hear about. Looking at this year, what have we seen just in the last month? The world of artificial intelligence has been taken by surprise in all sorts of ways. Those of us trying to make sense of this, or trying to help society make sense of this, have been thrown into a spin again. We've had the release of a model DeepSeek in China that seemed to challenge the dominance of the largest companies and suggest that the stories that we were hearing about, what some technologists had called scaling laws, might not be quite as robust as had been assumed. And then for people interested in the politics of artificial intelligence, we've seen just a couple of weeks ago an AI summit take place in Paris. I will talk in a bit about the previous iterations of the summit, but this was, heads of state and others, deputy heads of state, meeting to discuss what to do about artificial intelligence, and prominently the US and UK governments refusing to sign a statement that came out of that, even though that statement was rather bland. We've seen technology become embroiled in politics in a few other ways. So this rather ugly display that came out this morning from Donald Trump, the use of a generative AI video system to create content that he is using to make a case for his particular views, but also it's an embrace of a particular sort of aesthetic, a particular imaginary, and a lack of care about whether videos on the internet are real or not, right? So we've seen the spread of what some people have called AI slop, AI-generated content, with little consideration for what that might mean for the pollution of our information systems. And we've seen tech leaders falling in line behind the new administration. So this is Sam Altman joining Trump's announcement of a massive new investment in artificial intelligence. And then more recently, and again, even harder to make sense of, is Donald Trump bringing in Elon Musk into what might be the role of the most powerful unelected man in the Western world, not just sabotaging bureaucracy, but also making claims about replacing that bureaucracy with AI systems. This has got real, right? For those of us interested in responsible AI, this is very, very real indeed. The amounts of money, the amounts of attention, the amounts of political capital involved are extraordinary. They are unprecedented. For those of us who follow new technologies, this is different. And yet, for those of us that have been involved in debates about responsible innovation, you know, you look at the companies behind artificial intelligence and you see no shortage of talk that uses the language of responsibility. So we've seen the growth of the phrase responsible AI as a piece of corporate branding. We have seen many well-meaning individuals trying to come up with principles and approaches that might create some form of accountability, but we've also seen that when push comes to shove, none of this matters very much. And that's the critique of lots of the people who study these sorts of principles and the growth of domains like AI ethics, is that it seems like the principles aren't matched by practices. There's my work before getting involved in artificial intelligence was in this area of responsible innovation. I was interested in new technologies, from nanotechnology to synthetic biology to geoengineering, starting with the very banal Spider-Man point that with great power should come great responsibility. And if we regard science and technology as a form of power, then it should come with that responsibility. And yet the history of technology suggests that the responsibility is very thinly spread, and that often it comes to individuals, to individual scientists, to articulate some of the concerns about responsibility. I'm just going to mention one sort of particular heroic version of the responsible innovation agenda, which again became rather prominent recently because of the release of the movie Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer has been a very useful caricature for a particular idea of scientists agonizing about their implication in the technologies that they contribute to generating. And AI leaders, in this case Sam Altman, have sometimes drawn self-conscious analogies with Oppenheimer's dilemma. I just thought I would play a quick clip of Oppenheimer. I hope that you'll be able to hear the sound from this clip. Just tell me if you don't. Oppenheimer, you know, most famously is invoked the phrase "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," to sort of try and capture the scale of his own agonizing about his involvement in the Manhattan Project. But I thought this old clip of Oppenheimer, it's actually Oppenheimer as a fairly old man reflecting on some of these things, tells us a bit more about the realization.
Long ago, I said once that in a crude sense, which no vulgarity and no humor could quite erase, the physicists had known sin. And I didn't mean by that the deaths that were caused as the result of our work. I meant that we had known the sin of pride. We had turned to affect, in what proved to be a major way, the course of man's history. We had the pride of thinking we knew what was good for man. And I do think it has left a mark on many of those who were responsibly engaged. This is not the natural business of a scientist.
I think it's such an interesting quote that I hope you could hear it well enough, that the recognition there is not the sort of, you know, scientists as knowledge makers, the recognition as scientists as world makers, and the imposition that scientists had upon the world, and how that placed scientists in the Manhattan Project example into a very, very different role. And also the reflection there has implications for how we think about how we define the concerns. There's a lot in the movie. I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, about, you know, the scientists' own risk assessments as they were engaging in the Manhattan Project, as they were saying, you know, let's test this technology that they didn't know, right? This was unprecedented. They didn't know what the risks might be. So I'd just like to use that as a bridge into talking about risk and responsibility. This is me next to a landmark, one of my favorite landmarks here in London. It is a statue, a classical statue representing science on Holborn Viaduct in the middle of town. And the thing I'm pointing to there, completely anachronistically for this statue, is actually is one of the sort of devices of the Industrial Revolution. The thing that she is holding is a watt governor, a device for controlling the output of a steam engine designed by James Watt. And I think it's a really interesting sort of symbol of a particular scientific way of thinking about risk. It is being celebrated here as a device for controlling the huge power that had come from steam engines, but steam engines were dangerous things, and the power was nothing without control. And it was the Watt governor that stopped things from exploding. An ingenious device. It's a particular idea of risk as control, as containment, as something that can be fixed technologically. And my worry is that that idea of risk is being allowed to control quite a lot of the debate about artificial intelligence safety as well. And I, as a social scientist with interests in risk, have been, I got into thinking about AI risk originally by working on self-driving cars. So I was interested in self-driving cars as a test case for artificial intelligence in the wild. I initially thought this is a hugely important area because this was, real AI systems in control of 2 tons of metal at speed, with public space as their laboratory, right? This seemed to be a profoundly important, high stakes area. As a lot of STS people in science and technology studies do, we look for controversies, we look for accidents, because in the revelations around those controversies and accidents, we see assumptions that are once hidden suddenly becoming visible. And self-driving car crashes, are not just a sort of curiosity for me. They're a profoundly important location for social learning. So I got involved in researching the death. This news piece here is the reporting on the death of the first bystander killed by a self-driving car, a prototype self-driving car, Elaine Herzberg. I can go on and on and on about this example, but I won't, except that this was a clear failure of the technology, and it was a lesson in the risks of using public spaces and citizens as experimental subjects. It was a lesson in the reality of responsibility around AI technologies. So the blame game that took place around it was unedifying, but largely predictable for people that had known about how humans and automated systems interact in the past. One researcher, Madeline Ellish, talks about this in terms of human beings becoming the moral crumple zone, right? The softest, most easily blamed part of a complex socio-technical system. And I think we saw that with the death of Elaine Herzberg. Maybe I won't dwell on that example. If people want to come back to that, I'd be delighted to talk about self-driving cars for the rest of the day. But the leap that I made from thinking about self-driving car risk was actually towards a very different sort of imagined risk about artificial intelligence. And that was an existential risk. This seemed, again, for people that were unfamiliar with the debate about AI, the fact that people should be talking about the end of the world seemed like a rather unusual thing. It seemed peculiar. It didn't seem to have any obvious connection to people's own engagements with AI technologies as, sort of highly sophisticated, chat GPT type interfaces, the idea that this should lead to a Terminator style scenario in which the world ended seemed rather peculiar. For sociologists and historians, we were maybe less surprised because, well, I had heard the same sort of talk happening around nanotechnology, right? I had heard the same sort of talk happening around transhumanism and human enhancement, this very grand apocalyptic imagination of the dangers and downsides of a technology extrapolated from a particular idea about technological inevitability and an idea that the scientists involved would be heroes in this story. And I think the sort of, the heroic nature of this idea of risk isn't to be underestimated. I was so interested in, and just actually before I go on, let me just point out, so the open letter there, the admirably short open letter there, was signed by most of the leaders of the AI tech world, trying to, if you like, attract political attention to what they regarded as this existential risk, as this threat of human extinction. I got interested. I ended up making a radio program about this question, where I tried to understand not just, so the title is a little misleading, right? The sort of title is a way in. I wasn't so much interested in the reality of the threat. Needless to say, I was deeply skeptical that this was a sensible way to frame risk. But I was really interested in why prominent people were imagining this sort of thing. And in the case of artificial intelligence risk, it was not some, lunatic fringe or conspiracy theory group that had got overexcited and was talking in these terms, right? These were terms that were being used by governments. So the British Prime Minister of the time, Rishi Sunak, talked in these terms about the threats of artificial intelligence, and prominent AI leaders used that same language, used that same framing. So one of the first people we spoke to for this program is Geoffrey Hinton. Geoffrey Hinton, who is, this was before he had won a Nobel Prize, right? Before he'd won his Nobel Prize for all his work on deep learning. We went to go and see him to ask him, what he imagined the threats to be and why he thought what he did. Again, this is, it's often reported as though this is a new technology with a new risk, but actually the history of this is very old. These sorts of threats go back, and the imagination of these sorts of threats go back to, in the case of artificial intelligence, they go back to John von Neumann. In nanotechnology, they go back at least to the 1980s. The idea that out of control technology poses existential risks. It's also worth remembering that the idea of a technology slipping out of control and in effect superseding human beings goes back right to some of the founding scientific origin stories of artificial intelligence. This is Alan Turing writing in 1951. The idea of machines taking control has remained a strong part of the narrative. And one of my PhD students is actually looking at how these risks are being imagined among a few groups. One of them is protest groups. So we've seen these are not big mass mobilization events, but these are well-meaning, on the whole, a lot of them are university students coming together to, protest something that they regard as really, really, really serious. And just to give you a flavor for the sorts of arguments that they're putting forward, right? Their idea of risk is often tied to an idea of the technology, the idea of the technology being one of artificial and general intelligence. Those of us in the sociology of science who study expertise would also be interested in the idea of expert consensus there. But it's really interesting that this story, when it seems so odd, has attracted attention from the people closest to the technology in some cases, from governments, and from protest groups like this. And again, from a sort of policy studies angle, I might say it's maybe no surprise that the risks of artificial intelligence get framed in this way, because even if governments don't believe that that's the real concern, it's certainly convenient for them to regard the concern as not just long-term, but also as one that can be punted back to scientists for their consideration, rather than something that demands real regulatory action in the present. I think in trying to get a handle on some of these things, we don't just, need to challenge the assessment of risk. We also need to challenge the construction of the technology. We need to say it's actually the language of technological inevitability that is itself the problem here. And this goes back to Joseph Weizenbaum in the 1970s, an AI pioneer himself, but also one of the most thoughtful critics of artificial intelligence. This idea that Alex Campolo and Kate Crawford have called enchanted determinism still characterizes how so much of the sort of magical thinking around the technology. What does this existential risk idea overlook? Well, I would agree with another of my interviewees here for the BBC program that I did. This is Divya Siddharth, who runs a thing called the Collective Intelligence Project. And she's arguing here that the existential risk of artificial intelligence is oddly very clean and easy to compute. And it means that we don't have to think about inequality. It means that we don't have to think about who is going to benefit and who is at risk from a particular technology, because we can, problematize the technology as in this sort of all or nothing way that she describes. And I think it's a very powerful way to understand the risk. And actually, when I spoke to, this is Geoffrey Hinton at the top, and another prominent AI existential risk enthusiast, a guy called Connor Leahy, who works here in London as well, down the bottom. Behind the assessment of risk sits an idea that it's a sort of desire for consensus, right? It's like, how do we get politicians and the public to take seriously, to wake up to the idea of risk? Well, we have to come up with something that threatens everybody. And I think that's quite a powerful way to understand the construction of AI risk, is to see it as a sort of expression of fatalism. It's to say, well, in the same way as climate change risks are imagined, actually, to say, if you don't say it's a threat to everybody, then there's a danger that everybody can overlook it in some ways. In terms of politics, it was particularly interesting that Kamala Harris chose to challenge this when she came over to London for the first AI summit back in November 23. She specifically took a sort of socio-technical approach, and she was advised in this regard by many excellent people, including Alondra Nelson, who was then at the Office for Science and Technology Policy in the White House. Here, Kamala Harris is highlighting what she regards as the real risks, right, to particular groups within society from the irresponsible deployment of this technology. Now, I won't dwell on the the characterization of the different sort of risk, except that the diversity that she's presenting here is quite an interesting alternative. And the power of the American administration was such that it did have a real impact upon that AI summit that took place here in London, and changed the way that the British government talks about the risks of artificial intelligence. But whenever sociologists hear a risk being imagined, one of the ways that we think about these things is to ask questions like, well, if we're talking about safety and risk, right, we talk about acceptability of risk. We ask how safe is safe enough. And when people, whether they're politicians, technologists, or the public, think about the acceptability of risks, they might think, safe enough for what? They might balance that sense of acceptable risks against some sense of benefits and purposes. So that's where I'd like to go next, just to the question of the purposes of AI, because again, I think this is a key part of the organized irresponsibility around artificial intelligence, is a deliberate obfuscation of questions of purpose. So it's really notable that when AI leaders are asked about the benefits of AI or the purpose of what they're developing, the answers are often really not very convincing. This is Sam Altman. Sam Altman came to UCL as part of his world tour a couple of years ago. And here he is arguing that the sort of strategy is to make artificial general intelligence and then figure out how to make it safe and then what it's for. Right? It's a very Silicon Valley story. And it's extraordinarily unpersuasive, you would think, because it's so technologically deterministic. The answer to the question of the benefits of AI is trust us, we'll work those out. It's a rather peculiar form of social contract. But this idea of artificial general intelligence, which lots of people, me included, are very critical of, provides a rather useful sort of teleology for the field. It gives a sort of sense of direction. Where are we heading? Well, we're trying to reach this AGI, and when you try and put your finger on AGI, it's not quite clear. Different people have different definitions at different times, but it gives a sense of a project, that this is a project where these companies are in the intelligence business, right? They're not in, for example, the surveillance business or the advertising business or in the education business or in something else that might eventually make these companies money. And other critical social scientists have suggested that the real logic of artificial intelligence is rather different, whether that's platform capitalism, surveillance capitalism, or whatever. But I think for this purposes, and let me just state this, that the sort of irresponsibility of AI is actually one of its affordances. AI is enthusiastically adopted by lots of people precisely because of its irresponsibility, because these questions of hype, discrimination, misinformation, hallucination, opacity, risk that can be offshored onto others, and thin, if not absent, accountability. Those are not unintended consequences of artificial intelligence so much as reasons why it has attracted so much attention, right? They might actually be the key affordances of the technology. And it means that it's so very hard to get a handle on questions of, for example, copyright or accountability when it becomes easy for the creators of technology to locate responsibility somewhere else. So here is the chief lawyer of Google saying that, when asked, should a large language model be, should be held to account for its outputs if those outputs are libelous or dangerous in some way, and the the excuse here is one that has been used, for many technologies, which is that these technologies are somehow value neutral, and that we shouldn't blame the technologies for the things that people do with them. Okay, so I hope I've sort of clarified my sense of my problem with the irresponsibility of artificial intelligence. Let me just end on a sort of more optimistic note with a survey that we've just been doing. So we did a survey of more than 4,000 AI researchers, which we compared to public surveys that had taken place here in the UK, asking about various issues around artificial intelligence. I won't be able to show you all of this, but I'd be happy to dig more into the findings. And I think what I'd like to just draw out here are some comparisons between public and AI researchers' views. So these are researchers who have published papers on artificial intelligence. They are AI scientists. And the first thing to say is, understandably, they're more positive than members of the public about the balance of risks and benefits. Right? I think we'd find that unsurprising. There is some disagreement on what the particular benefits of artificial intelligence might be, with overall levels of enthusiasm greater for AI researchers than for members of the public. But where I think it's quite interesting is that if you ask AI researchers about their suggestion of what the risks are, actually, the pattern of priorities in terms of the risks is quite similar to that of members of the public. It seems that AI researchers are concerned about the things that the public are concerned about when it comes to the risks of artificial intelligence. Let me just drop in a couple more examples, and then I will wrap up, because I'm keen to hear what you all think. We also asked. We did some comparisons between what members of the public think about where they imagine responsibility should lie for the safe use of artificial intelligence. And I think we can learn some things from comparing AI researchers and the public here. What we have, sorry, the key has fallen off this, yet in the same, we've got members of the public in light green and AI researchers in dark green here. And what we can see is, and some of this political scientists would interpret as, a general public malaise, a lack of trust in institutions, which is why trust in government is so low. A desire for independence on the part of the public, though, is quite clear. We also compared on this question. We asked about whether AI researchers agreed or disagreed with a statement that potentially is quite radical, right? The idea that the people who create AI systems should be held responsible for the real world impacts of those systems. What we see in general is a surprising, I think, degree of desire for accountability among the researchers themselves, some of whom will be involved in creating AI systems. Particularly those who we classify as pessimists because of their answers to other questions. And because it's a live debate at the moment, we also asked about, what AI researchers regard as the legitimate uses of training data, or legitimate sources of training data. And here, again, we were surprised how many AI researchers didn't think that the use of data for the training of AI systems should just be a free-for-all, right? They wanted much more care about where data was coming from. And again, the agreement with the members of the public, I think, is the surprising thing here. Now, listen, I've done 42 minutes or so I will wrap up and hand over to you, Simone. But hopefully I have been clear that when we think about responsible AI, we should start from the presumption of organized irresponsibility and work from there. Otherwise, we risk being taken by surprise again by the sorts of political whiplash that we've seen the last month or so. But the hope would be that if we are able to find ways that AI researchers might better engage with members of the public, there is the potential for a much more constructive debate about the risks, benefits, opportunities, uncertainties of this technology. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much. I think, I mean, the applause you can't hear, but I'm sure there is, because this was really, really, I mean, at least for me, really, really interesting. And I mean, just as a side note of color, sometimes, for example, for me, being an economist, sometimes when we have discussions with or debates with people from science and technology studies, there are clearly differences in vocabularies or approaches, while it was very, very clear and to the point what you presented to us. So thanks a lot.